Howdy gang, and welcome back. Today's episode is about a real throwback. The Legend of Zelda initially released as a Famicom Disk System game in February 1986. Later, it was released on the NES in August 1987. It was the first console game to have a save battery, instead of having passwords or expecting you to marathon the whole thing. 80s Nintendo, we here in the modern day thank you. The game was really ambitious for its time, with a big game world full of varied enemies and many dungeons sure to give players a plentiful amount of adventure for hours to come. They didn't put that battery in there for nothing, you know. It was a tremendous accomplishment for the time. But in current year, how good is it? Let's take a look. The game's opening is quite iconic. Immediately, the title screen and music invite your attention and get you hyped up for the adventure. After a moment, you get a text crawl explaining the plot. Prince Darkness, Ganon. Damn it, Ganon!
You will die!
That's better. Stole the Triforce of Power and kidnapped Princess Zelda some time ago, but not before she was able to break the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces and scatter them across 8 dungeons. Link has to get the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom and defeat Ganon to save Zelda and all of Hyrule. Now, why is the Triforce made of only 2 segments? Bad math? Did someone forget the Triforce of Courage? Anyway, the text crawl also gives us a list of all the items in the game, then we're told to look up the manual for details. Well, that's helpful. Now let's hit the start button and get going, huh? When you jump in, you're given no info at all. You're unarmed, and there's a single doorway on the screen, which does a good job of subtly leading you to an old man in a cave who gives you your first sword. From here, you really start the adventure of Link. Okay, I walked right into that one. You'll be exploring the land of Hyrule, fighting monsters, looking for secrets and cool loot, and trying to find the pieces of the Triforce. And when I say trying to find, I really mean trying to find. This is definitely an NES game, and you were supposed to have the manual handy. The in-game map is this wonky mini-map thing, which pretty much tells you nothing except for your very vague relative position on the overworld map. The manual included a separate map and had some stuff to help walk you through the early stuff, but even that would only get you so far. I admit it's a little cheap, but I just used a map from the internet with everything labeled on it. I'm just not a fan of stumbling around blindly, but aside from that, I didn't mind my experience too much. The gameplay is pretty simple. You control Link in real-time action combat from a top-down perspective, and you can do a few things. Link can run around, stab with a sword, use various projectiles like the boomerang, bow and arrow, or magic wand, or blow stuff up with bombs. And you can change between the various items you've collected throughout the game using the menu screen. As the game progresses and you explore the world, Link becomes stronger as he gains more heart containers, better equipment, magic rings that reduce the damage he takes, and even an upgrade to his maximum bomb capacity. Some people will say that The Legend of Zelda is like an RPG, but I think that since its mechanics involve Link powering up through collecting stuff rather than through some sort of stat-based leveling system, it'd be better to compare it to the Metroidvania genre. And seeing as how both Zelda and Metroid are Nintendo properties, you might say they're cousins to each other. What was I saying? Oh yeah. Once you manage to find a dungeon, things change a little bit. On the menu screen, you can see a map that shows each room that you've been in so far inside of a dungeon. A mini-map similar to the one used in the overworld shows your relative position in the dungeon. You can find a compass which will tell you where the boss is, and you can find a map.
I'm the map.
Defeating a boss spawns a heart container that increases your health by 1 heart, and you can grab the Triforce piece and then you're teleported out of the dungeon with full health. And the adventure continues. Part of what makes the Zelda formula is puzzle solving. Here, puzzles are very basic and bare bones. Kill everything in a room, push some arbitrary block to open something, or blow up some arbitrary wall to reveal a hidden path inside of a dungeon room or out in the overworld. Or use a candle to burn some arbitrarily placed bush in the overworld to reveal a hidden room, but that's basically just the bomb thing, but not using bombs. There's not really much to any of this, just a bit of guesswork. At least using the map inside of a dungeon and comparing it to what you've already discovered helps you potentially find some of the secret rooms, but out in the overworld you really don't have anything helping you find any of it, and there's not really any rhyme or reason to these things. Is it really a puzzle if it's just a bunch of blind guessing? At least this game has the occasional NPC to give some helpful hints. Okay, seriously? At least stuff like the easternmost peninsula vaguely makes sense. And at least the smoke thing makes sense if you already know that the game is telling you that you have to use the bombs to hurt the Dodongos. It won't really help you to figure that out, but I guess bombs explode and explosions make smoke, right? And the Digdogger hates flute. Damn, I bet he'd really hate Camel. But then there's level 7. These hints are absolutely useless. Grumble, grumble? How are you supposed to figure out what that means just playing the game and maybe looking at the manual? You have to buy the meat item, an otherwise optional and basically useless item from one of the random merchants out in the world, and give it to this guy. Why couldn't he just say, "Boy, I sure am hungry"?
And then there's this asshole.
The secret is in the tip of the nose. You mean this room? That's not a nose, that's a parabola. I had to Google it anyway because I totally missed it even with the hint, so thanks for nothing. Granted, I could just be an idiot, but, it didn't really look like a nose, okay? To be fair, not all of the hints are useless. For example, they tell you to go get a sword upgrade from the old man on top of the waterfall a few dungeons in, and later a second sword upgrade from another old man in the graveyard. In general, though, info is not given all too well. The text crawl at the beginning of the game lists the items, but without the manual, you won't know what a lot of them do. Even with it, where do you find the meat or the blue ring or the blue candle? You could realistically go through the whole game and never once buy the magic shield or a lot of the other stuff. In general, this game is really stingy about information. Difficulty is... well... okay, so here's the thing. Link's not really particularly mobile, and he's only able to stab in front of himself. You're not really maneuverable, and you can't really hit around yourself too well, plus the controls can be a little laggy at times. I think this is definitely problematic from time to time. Nothing outright game-breaking, but also kinda just aggravating. I found that the dark nuts in the earlier dungeons gave me a lot of trouble. They hit hard, they're constantly moving, and hitting them from the front doesn't hurt them at all. Maybe I just suck at dealing with them. Later they're fine because you have armor and better gear, but early on I had a hard time with them. Later on, the Wizrobes are aggravating as hell because they hit hard from distance, blue ones move a lot, and for some reason Nintendo seemed to think that this was a bullet hell game with everything they're expecting you to dodge sometimes. But it's not really very consistent about it either. Some of the difficulty comes from you not having a lot of health, protection, or damage in early parts of the game. Some of it comes from annoying rooms, but it's not unlikely that a dungeon will be a total pain in the ass. Up until you get to the boss, stomp them with no fanfare whatsoever, and then go about your day like nothing ever happened, even though 5 minutes ago you were getting raffle stomped. I just don't get it. I guess it was 1986 and things were different. It's a bit annoying sometimes, though. You've managed to clear the 8 dungeons and get the Triforce pieces. Now it's time to overcome the final obstacle of your adventure. Death Mountain! Yeah, you remember when I said there were 8 dungeons? Well, I lied. Now that you have the 8 Triforce pieces, you have to head into Ganon's lair and defeat him to save Zelda and Hyrule once and for all.
You dare bring light to my lair? You must die!
This one is absolutely ginormous and complicated, with a lot of rooms that lead you to staircases that go to other parts of the dungeon. I used a map for this one because, man, that's a lot of moving around. There's lots of nasty foes like Wizrobes and Dark Nuts in here, but the risk is worth the reward. You'll find the red ring. The optional blue ring cut damage taken in half, but this one cuts it to a quarter. You also get the magical silver arrow, which you're gonna need. Eventually, you will find Ganon, and now it's showtime. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you, I put a save state right before his lair. I didn't want to possibly have to go and get more potions and go through the whole dungeon just to try again. He's invisible and moving around the room while throwing fireballs at you, but where they're coming from hints to where he might be. Hit him with the sword a little bit, shoot him with some magic arrows, and he'll go down. Now you've saved the princess and beaten the game. So where do we go from here? It's almost time for the conclusion, but I have a couple of other thoughts I'd like to throw in here. When you beat the game, you unlock a second quest, which rearranges everything and is tougher. I haven't tried it, but maybe I should in the future. I've beaten the first quest once on the Game Boy Advance version and once on the NES version, so it'd probably be a nice shake-up if I ever played this again, and I would recommend it if you're in the same boat as me and want something fresh. One unusual aspect about this game is its heavily non-linear design. Let me preface this by saying that my only experience with the Zelda series is beating this game and Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, and playing through about half of A Link to the Past. But my understanding, limited though it is that after Zelda 1, the series became really linear up until Breath of the Wild. But in this one, the reins are very loose. You could maybe argue that it's bad game design in the sense that players are just not directed at all. As a result, it's easy for players to end up going places they're clearly not ready for. But in another sense, it's rather freeing. Go into a dungeon and decide it's a little too annoying, you can bail out and go try another one. Already know where a lot of the secrets are? Well, there's a very good chance you could go get them very early. Since you could buy the blue candle immediately if you can get the rupees, you could theoretically go straight into the second to last dungeon of the game if you wanted to. Of course, this does have its limits. Don't even bother going to Death Mountain without all the Triforce pieces. You'll still need one of the candles to enter the 8th dungeon at all. You'll also have to get the raft from level 3 to enter level 4, the ladder from level 4 to clear parts of various dungeons, and the flute from level 5 to open level 7. Plus you have to buy meat for the gorilla in level 7, and you need to find the silver arrow from Death Mountain to hurt Ganon. But in general, it's really non-linear. Lots of items like the magic key, magic wand, and others can be completely skipped, and all keys work in all dungeons, and you can buy them if you have to. If that's not enough, even without the unlimited magic key, you can sometimes bypass needing to have keys at all by bombing walls. It's interesting that they let you do a whole lot without trying to slap you on the wrist and get you back on track. I see why more recent games have looked to this one for inspiration. So now it's time for our wrap-up. I asked if this game is still worth it in current year. At the time I made this video, the latest game in the series, Tears of the Kingdom, has recently released, so you can tell the series is still going strong. As for this game, well, I think there's a few things to consider. Positives. The lack of information creates a sort of immersion into the game, in the sense that Link doesn't know where everything is or how to handle the challenges that lie before him, and neither do you. It gives a feeling of truly being on an adventure, with all the confusion of actually having to learn how that would work. Lots of non-linear design means that players aren't necessarily strictly being railroaded by the designers, allowing for different players of different skill and experience levels to potentially have wildly different experiences. Players seeking more can play a second quest for even more adventuring and challenge. Negatives. The lack of information, while maybe helping you to identify with Link, is absolutely brutal. The game does not want to share info. The few NPCs are dubious at best, and the lack of basic features like a world map is bound to frustrate many. It's an NES game through and through, and the combination of tech limitations and translation difficulties leads many NES titles to require an instruction manual to help with a lot of basic info. It's also probably a bit of a guide game in general, and I would probably recommend you look at doing that if you play it. But if I have to constantly check an external source for crucial information on how to play the game, even if I don't mind doing that myself, critically, I have to look at that as a bit of a failing on the game's part. Non-linearity is a double-edged sword. An experienced player can get a lot of enjoyment from it, but a new player might be frustrated by the lack of basic direction. There are no safety rails to help ease a player in, which I think would turn off a lot of people. Combat in the game's design in general is very basic and repetitive, with lackluster combat, trial and error puzzles and secrets if one would care to call them that, and sometimes annoying dungeon design. In conclusion, I like The Legend of Zelda, but I've been actively trying to better appreciate older games, and I like reading game manuals, even if it's just a PDF I got on the internet for free. I can still remember the time when video games had manuals, and as a kid, I always looked through the manual on the way home anytime I got a game. Maybe that sort of thing just takes me back to a simpler time. But I don't know if I can recommend the original Legend of Zelda to a new player except with these caveats. Get a map, maybe even the instruction manual, and expect a rough, less refined, and more unguided experience. It's The Legend of Zelda, but it's coarse and very rudimentary. For most people, I think that A Link to the Past or Link's Awakening would be a better entry into the traditional 2D top-down style Zelda games, at least based on what I hear about Link's Awakening and its Switch remake, and based on my time playing a fair amount of A Link to the Past. Luckily, all of these except for the Switch remake of Link's Awakening are on Nintendo Switch Online, so you don't have to break the bank to play any of these. If you want to get an old-school NES experience or you just want to see where it all started, this might be the game for you, but just be aware of what you're getting into. Okay, I think that should about wrap it up. Those are my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda for NES. Let me know what you think about Zelda 1, or about the video, or about life, the universe, and everything in the comments. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like, or maybe even subscribing for more content like this in the future. I'll see you in the next one.